One of the things I've always been really impressed with in cooking is those things that take a little bit extra effort. And today we're going to do one of those things. We're going to make cabbage rolls, which to me have always involved a lot of labor. It's kind of hard to do. And I'm going to show you a trick to take the hardest part out of this. Still involves a lot of steps, so that when you see the recipe, don't be shocked. There are a lot of steps, but they run pretty fast once you get going. Start with a regular cabbage and peel off the outside leaves. They're a little bit big and a little bit overgrown. You don't really need those at this point for this stage, but what we're going to do is get down to the core part of it here, or the main body. Take this, put it in a regular old plastic bag, put a good twist tie on it or a rubber band, and stick this in the freezer. Doesn't need to be a freezer bag or anything like that, because we're not going to leave it in there very long. You need to freeze it at least overnight to make sure that it's frozen clear to the core. Now once that's done, you can go on to stage 2, which is to get that big cabbage back out of the freezer. And you notice now that the leaves are very limp. Before, if we would have tried to peel them off, they are very brittle because they haven't been softened at all by freezing, and they're more apt to break. And so peeling them off the cabbage became the trickiest part. You either had to core into it or you had to boil it for a while, and then you're working with something that's hot. Now I'm going to take a big knife and cut about an inch slice off the bottom. Now save that part and cut the bits off the bottom here, because we can use those. And what we're going to do is get a big pot and put these pieces on the bottom of it and any other bits that you've got. These were the ones that we had earlier. And I'm putting them on the bottom just in any old way because I want to keep the cabbage rolls that I make suspended off the bottom a bit. And this will help keep them from burning or scorching later on, particularly if you have a dark pan like we're using here. Now go back to that big cabbage again, and you have the leaves that will simply peel off. And if you get to the center and it's not quite thawed enough, it takes around half an hour or so, just put it back in the cold water and let it begin to thaw again. Now another thing you may need to do as you get down towards the bottom is you may run off of the part that's been trimmed away, in which case you simply cut a little bit more off the bottom and again throw that part back in. See, this one's still got some ice in it, so I'll probably need to put that one back in the water just to cool a little bit more. Now we have plenty of leaves here that we can start with, so let's work on the filling. I've got about a pound of lean ground beef, and you want to have it as lean as you can because there's really not a good opportunity to drain the fat away on this. To that I'm going to add a cup of raw rice, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of ground allspice, about half a cup or half of a medium or small onion that you've chopped up fairly finely, half a teaspoon of salt, and a fourth of a teaspoon of black pepper. Now generally I don't like to recommend that people dig their hands into ground beef or other kinds of meats, but for this one I really don't have a good alternative for you because you're going to need to use your hands to shape them anyway. So if you have any kind of open sore on your hand, you should wear a plastic glove over it. I strongly recommend that you not use the plastic gloves that you use for cleaning, however. Do have a separate pair that you use specifically for cooking, or some of the disposable ones would be even a better idea. Now you take one of your big leaves and you kind of lay it out in front of you. You take a small piece of the ground beef mixture. We're going to make 16 of these so you can divide it out. Some of them will need less because they'll be smaller as you get to the center of the cabbage. Lay this on the bottom end here and simply start to roll and tuck it around. Now you probably recognize this from other things you've done in Mexican cookery, and that's all there is to it. Then simply put the seam side down in your pan, and you go through the process with all of the cabbage leaves until you've used up all of the ground beef. And when you get all of them made, you'll probably, unless you have a very large pan, end up with a couple of layers. But see how easily these roll since they've been made limp by the freezing process. You'll have a couple of layers. Now because we have rice in here, we need to cook it with a lot of water. You also need to cook it with a lot of water because cabbage is a sulfur-containing vegetable. And that means that the sulfur compounds are going to come out as it cooks. And since this has to cook a fairly long time to make sure that you get the ground beef well done, there's going to be a lot of cabbage smell in your house when you do this. The larger amount of water will help absorb some of the sulfur as it is volatilized during the cooking process, so it'll help keep it down somewhat. But you've also got some other smells in here that are going to help balance that out, the cinnamon, the allspice. We're going to add a little bit of garlic and so on, so that it won't be just like overcooking regular old cabbage. When you get them all in here, you need to cover it with enough water so that they're all underwater, and then you want to make sure you keep them under the water by putting a plate over the top of them. Just a regular old plate would do. Now if this one was full, you get a plate that fits about the size of the pan, turn it upside down and suspend it under there. The water will be about up to it. Put in a clove of garlic that's been quartered, and then put everything on to simmer for 30 minutes. After you've got it simmered for 30 minutes, then you need to take it off, and we're going to drain away part of the extra water, because while it was important to have all that water for the cooking process to make sure the rice got done, it's really a little bit too much to use for the sauce. So we're going to try and take some of that away. Remove the plate, and if you can find the garlic, it's a good idea to try and fish it out, because you don't really need somebody to bite into that whole quarter of a clove. So you know how many you put in. I try to put them around the edges, kind of in quadrants, so that they're not too hard to fish out. And we'll find that other one after we drain it a bit. Put the lid on, and I'm going to save the liquid that I'm draining off, because I don't really know how much I want later, and I may want to thin it down a little bit. And in any case, you want to save it to make soup with later on. There's quite a bit of nutrition in here, and there's no point in getting rid of all of it. Okay, that's probably enough to drain away. And if the rolls are cooked well, they won't have moved around too much. Now, to that, we're going to make a sauce with either about a pint of tomato sauce that you've canned or that you've bought at the store, or some diced tomatoes. And here you can make a choice as whether or not you want to use just the regular tomatoes that are diced and cut up, or whether you want to use some of those with more seasoning in them. It kind of depends on how much seasoning you like. And then about a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice to that. This is then going to go back on the stove and simmer for about another 10 minutes or so. Put a lid on it unless you decide that the sauce is too thin, and then you may want to take the lid off and let it simmer a little bit longer after that 10 minutes. There you go, cabbage rolls. You always thought they were nearly impossible to do, took forever to make, but once you know a few tricks, they are easy to do. Another thing you need to know is that they freeze extremely well. This made 16 cabbage rolls. If you don't need 16 at one time, get yourself some of these nice freezer bags or other freezer containers. Put the number that you'll need for one serving into the container, label it, date it, seal it well, and store it in the freezer for a cold winter evening when you don't have much time.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.